when I talked about types of changes, one of the things that I mentioned was the difference between normal and standard changes. And I mentioned that standard changes can often be handled or managed through the service request management or the request fulfillment process. Service requests are handled by the service desk typically, and they are really different from the standard incidents or the regular incidents that are submitted to the service desk. So incidents are basically the break-fix part of what IT does and what the service desk does specifically. So it's an incident is a failure or degradation of service, whereas a service request is the service that hasn't been disrupted. It's just something new that an end user may be requesting. The risks and costs are known. The resolution is provided by the request fulfillment process. It's a planned activity as opposed to an incident, which is unplanned. The reason why I mention this now, even though service requests are technically part of the service operation phase of the lifecycle, just wanted to kind of bring that back to the whole concept of standard changes. And something really important to remember here is when you see this differentiation, it's important to understand. I think one thing that we get caught up with is when we're talking about metrics and KPIs, understand that KPIs for service requests are really, or should be, much different than the KPIs for incidents. Service requests, often we're talking about there, you may have several days lead time that you would need for example, if somebody is requesting a new laptop, whereas that's not the same way you're going to measure service for an IT failure or something that's broken and needs to be fixed. To talk a little bit more about metrics, I'm going to mention briefly the CSI, or Continual Service Improvement phase of the life cycle. In CSI, we have at the core, or the basis of the CSI model, the Deming cycle, which is essentially plan, do, check, act. So it's the check portion here that we're talking about when we're talking about KPIs and reporting. Excuse me, so KPIs are based on our critical success factors, and so I use an example here from change management. So for example, if we've determined in IT that it's critical to protect IT services when making changes, then we may want to measure how many incidents were caused by a particular change. So we can link incidents to a change to identify how many incidents were caused by that change. So I was speaking once to a group in New Hampshire at an HDI meeting, and before the talk started, a service desk manager came up and was talking about how the security team in his organization had decided that Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. was a great time to change their password policy. Of course, they never informed the service desk, and it caused lots of headaches then for the service desk when they started getting these calls, people having to change their passwords, not sure what to do. So that was an example of an undocumented change that had a large impact and caused a high level of incidents to the organization. Some other examples of KPIs within change management. You'll notice that each of the KPIs has an arrow associated with it. That means that's the direction that we would want to see that KPI take. So if we have an unplanned or unauthorized changes, we would want to see a reduction in those types of changes, a reduction in incidents caused by changes, a reduction in outages, and a reduction in emergency changes. So I know some organizations rely heavily on emergency changes, but it just shows a lack of planning and contributes a lot of risk to the organization. For release management, here I'm focusing again on testing. I always talk a lot about testing and training when we talk about release management. So we want to see a reduction in releases that didn't have adequate testing. Just like we'd want to see a reduction in emergency changes, we want to see a reduction in urgent releases, a reduction in incidents caused by releases, and a reduction in the number of failed releases. Finally, for knowledge management, we want to see an increase in the articles added to the knowledge base and incidents then that are resolved by those articles. It's even better if we can provide level 0 support. Level 0 refers to a self-service interface which would allow the end users to resolve an issue without even having to create an incident for the service desk. Finally, the last phase here, where we'll talk about some of the KPIs, is ITSACM, again, configuration management for short. It's helpful for the organization if we can see incidents linked to CIs. That just means that we are using that indicates that we're using the CMDB and we're able to make good decisions based on the information that we've got in the CMDB. An increase in the number of CIs in the CMS. We don't necessarily need to keep growing our infrastructure, and with virtualization, there may be some cause or want to see a reduction in the number of CIs in the CMS. But really, what it usually indicates is that we're getting better at documenting and keeping inventory of our CIs. It's also helpful to see a reduction in the number of unauthorized software. So especially if we're facing an audit, I know for a lot of organizations, they put discovery tools in place either as reaction to or in anticipation of an audit. And that's especially important for, I know, a lot of the government organizations with which we work. So with that, that concludes the specific focus here today on service transition. Nancy, at this point, before the recap, I'll ask if there are any other questions that have come up.
Yes, Nikki, I have one question. You mentioned earlier about the service process tools, the SNPM in Remedy Force and in Remedy. The question here is do we have any experience with the BMC footprint alignability model that came out with version 11.5, I think? Do we have any experience there with that?
I personally do not. I'm not sure, Nancy, that if you can answer that question, but I would presume that it's the same as the alignability model that comes with Remedy Force.
That's correct. It is very similar in nature, and it's the processes, procedures, and work instructions as they relate to the different tools, and they're based on the ITIL framework. The purpose for those processes those models are to utilize them as the basis for developing your processes in the event that you haven't done so. And the beauty of it is that it does take you down to the step-by-step instructions on how to perform different functions in the tool sets as they relate to that framework. So yes, I have had experience in utilizing the alignability model in footprint work sessions that I've done with our clients.
All right, thank you.
And that is the question that I have so far in Q&A.
All right. Let me see here. Oh, I see 6 other questions in the Q&A.
Oh, okay. There were 3 other ones that were talking about the sound. It had cut out, but it's back working now. So that was 3 of them, and so that's what I see. So you are welcome to list out the other questions.
Okay. So the one that I saw the question about the footprint service process model. So thank you for that. Who initiates a vendor request for change? So if the vendor does not have access to the system, and typically they would not, they're usually notifying somebody within IT, so whoever the service owner might be. So in the case of a Microsoft Windows update, that might be the either a network or server admin or whoever is the designated person. That person then should be responsible for submitting the request for change into the change management system. And they may actually have reference to, or kind of have information. I know some customers have tight integrations with their vendors, where they're actually receiving requests or passing on requests to their vendors. So there may be some interaction like that. But it would usually just be the person who is on the IT side who is going to be responsible for seeing that implementation through. Nancy, any other input on that one? Who initiates a vendor RFC?
That's exactly the response that I would provide as well.
Okay. Let me make a note of that. And then there was a question, wouldn't change requests submitted by end users typically be service requests? Yes, I would say short answer there is yes, but I would expand a little bit and say that there may be change requests. So perhaps it's more of a business analyst, but it could even be just any end user. Kind of the example I gave of, if they want a new report added to the finance application. That's not a service request. That would need to be something that's reviewed by the development team to provide an assessment. It would need to go before the change advisory board. There would need to be appropriate testing and training, perhaps. So there are requests like that really are change requests and not service requests. You should give them the ability to submit service requests. So if they want a new laptop, they want a new application installed on their system, those types of things. But they should be able to submit RFCs as well.
And I can add a little bit to that, in that your casual end users very often will have requests that will come in the form of service requests for field or form changes to applications that they're working in. Those would indeed create changes because those changes may very well impact the functionality of the application. And so they need to go through, whether it's a standard change process or whether it's your normal change process that has to go to the cab. It depends on what the risk is of that change that they're requesting. So you may find your casual end users that are submitting service requests on the front end that indeed create change requests and take those through the change process. Okay.
And there was one final question, and we do have a few minutes remaining here, so I'll go in and follow up on this question. Does the system support external users submitting incidents requests through internet-facing portal? Yes, each BMC product has a self-service interface. So Remedy Force, Footprints, and Remedy all have self-service components and capabilities that can be set up, and they're included with the products out of the box. They need to be configured, but they are included.